Great. Thank you so much, Abby. And hello, everyone. I am Elizabeth, or Betsy Hawley, the visiting assistant professor in art history and visual studies at Northeastern University and the curator of this show. And I'm sorry we can't all be in the gallery, wine in hand in person tonight, but I'm thrilled that those of you that who might not have been able to join us in person are able to do it this way. It's a nice silver lining. I myself am zooming in from Philadelphia tonight, and I want to recognize that both this location, as well as the physical location of Apex Arts Gallery, they're on the lands, the ancestral homelands of the Lenape and I honor Lenape past, present, and future, and I express my appreciation for this land and their caretaking of it. And I will also note that I myself am a non-native curator. I am a scholar of American art and modern and contemporary art. I'm really invested in ensuring that Indigenous art is a part of these narratives, changing the parameters rather than shoehorning this art into existing parameters. But I am coming from the subject position of a cisgendered Euro or Anglo-American woman. And to that end, I so appreciate the active participation of the artists in this show. I have sought their input, their suggestions. They have been incredibly generous with their time and with their expertise. And so I know some of them have joined us here tonight, and I just want to say in this public forum, I would like to echo the thanks that I've given you privately. And finally, I do want to acknowledge that this opening is occurring just a week after the assault on democracy that occurred at the U.S. Capitol, and I have been thinking a lot about how the democratic system and values under attack were modeled by the founders of the United States, in part on the Iroquois Confederacy, on other indigenous systems of democratic governance. But in these indigenous systems, many of them, women's cultural roles were and are highly respected. Women held powerful leadership positions. And this, of course, was an aspect of democratic governance that was ignored by the Euro-American men who first established and built the United States, which they did in large part by assaulting the very communities from whom they had borrowed these democratic principles. The founding fathers, they infamously did not remember the ladies, per Abigail Adams. And so patriarchy and colonialism and the violence of those systems are inextricably intertwined. And that really brings me to this show. This is, I really first started thinking about this exhibition in 2019, when so many institutions in the US were gearing up to celebrate the centennial, the 1920 passage of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. And this, of course, it was a momentous occasion, but I did find that contemporary conversations, at least in mainstream coverage, were lacking, because the language of the amendment granted suffrage only to some women. The text itself of the amendment reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied on account of sex." But note that phrase, citizens of the United States. American Indians were not considered citizens until the 1924 passage of the Indian Citizenship Act, and due to state laws that governed elections, Indigenous suffrage across the US was not achieved until the 1960s. It was also in 1960 that First Nations people in Canada gained the right to vote in federal elections without losing their treaty status. And then, of course, it was also in the 1960s that the mainstream feminist movement developed, promoting many ideas that have been inherent to Indigenous communities for generations. Respect for women's roles in the community, eligibility for leadership positions, to give a couple of examples. But Native women's specific community concerns were really sidelined in the early feminist movement, which it promoted this whitewashed sort of idea of universal womanhood. And so the historical proximity of the legislations I was just talking about, the many connections between feminism and indigeneity and decolonization that have been drawn by Native feminists is really the impetus for this exhibition. And let's get to the art. Let's dig into these connections through the artworks that we have on view here. We're going to start with this 4-poster suite by Diné artist Dimian Dinéaché and the collective Rise, Radical Indigenous Survivance and Empowerment. The individual titles of the posters you see here, they really underscore, the significance of Indigenous feminism, this need to decolonize feminism. They remind us that Native communities have long practiced this form of what we might call proto-feminism or no-wave feminism. And they're near the gallery entrance here. The posters really establish the core premise of the show, that concepts of feminism need to be decolonized to account for more diverse experiences of people coming from various subject positions, even as the ideals of mainstream feminism echo some aspects of longstanding Native worldviews. And I'll just note here in those posters, the pairing that we see of archival photographs with these more sort of graphic backgrounds. On the one hand, these draw from really rich traditions of basketry, of weaving, but they also reference the bright, solid colors of modern art, of pop art. And the implication is that Native peoples and their arts are alive and well, really refuting this stereotype of the vanishing race that sadly still circulates. And so it's another reason that showing contemporary Indigenous art is so important. And as we move further into the space, we have another 2 Rise posters, Honor Indigenous Women. You're going to see on the left here, it really emphasizes the strength and the cultural contributions of Native women. And then Decolonize Your Love, LUVVV, Love, reproduces an 1877 photograph of Osh-Tisch and their wife. Osh-Tisch, who's one of the figures here, was an Absolute Crow Bade, which is a Crow term for a person who was assigned male at birth, who later takes on the social and ceremonial roles of women. And Osh-Tisch was one of the last Crow Bades as the practice was repressed by US agents insisting on the adherence to the sort of rigid gender binary, right? Men and women. And at one point they rounded up Osh-Tisch and other Bades, they threw them in jail, they cut their hair, they made them perform manual labor that was considered to be more, quote unquote, masculine. It was sort of akin to like a 19th century conversion therapy. And a really important part of Native feminisms is acknowledging the gender fluidity that was accepted and in many cases celebrated in pre-invasion Indigenous communities, but then subjugated to hetero patriarchal ideals. And today this fluidity is often referred to as two-spiritedness, two-spirit peoples. So we're gonna zoom to the very back wall here. We're gonna track constellations of ideas in this show rather than the flow of the floor plan, but we're gonna zoom back. The subject of two-spiritedness is also taken up by Sheldon Raymore. He's a storyteller and member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Nation. And Two-Spirit Teepee here, it revises a historic 19th century image of a Winkte, which is a Lakota term similar to Bade, person assigned male at birth who takes on social roles of women. And the Winkte figure, it's very small, it's at the very bottom there. You see it in this lower section of the teepee, mini teepee cover. I think you can see the figures. He has long hair, wearing a dress. They have a sort of prominent phallus. And then above the figure, much more visible here in this shot, we see the face of Raymore's own two-spirit alter ego, Prepahantas, who is a figure involved in AIDS awareness in Native communities. And then they are flanked by the masculine and feminine, sun and moon here. And I will say Raymore will be discussing this work in greater length and in greater depth during a recorded performative storytelling event that will be available later in January. And then he and I will host a sort of Q&A session about the performance on January 30th. So I'm going to put a pin in this and just say more to come. Mark your calendars. We're going to turn to their projected videos in the corner of this space here. And I think Ryan's going to pull up one of them in the space here. Yeah. And one of these pieces is Marcella Ernest's Because of Who I Am. Ernest is an Ojibwe artist, and this piece addresses the ways that the imposition of a colonialist, heteropatriarchal gender binary, it has had really devastating effects on Indigenous communities, and we see that in contemporary life. The work chronicles the experience of a multidisciplinary Dene or Navajo artist, Jolene Yazzie, who she dances in the men's category of Northern traditional dances at powwows, and we see some clips of this in the video. And so in choosing to dance with the men, this is something that Yazzie has been bullied for. And by claiming her right to do this and rejecting anti-two-spirit sentiments that have pervaded her community, she's reclaiming agency. She's an earnest video. It really celebrates this reclamation and defiance against ongoing discrimination. And Ernest's work includes sort of spliced in or stills of Yazzie's artwork, which is also included in the show. Nice visual pairing here in the exhibition space. We'll zoom over there. Sisters of War also addresses gender fluidity. So note that the women here, they are wearing Dene men's war hats. This is an act that points to recorded histories of women operating as warriors in Dene culture. And it also refuses contemporary gender binaries that are the outcome of these heteropatriarchal ideas colonizing Dene worldviews. And the enormity of this piece, I hope you see it in person, it's huge. The enormity of this piece, this sort of punchy comic book aesthetic that is suffused in this red, deep red, it really underscores the strength of these women warriors in a style that is as contemporary as they are. And then if we're going to swivel across the room, we have another work that references a kind of conceptual colonization. This is Diani Whitehawk. She is a Sachangu Lakota artist. And in the painting, The Heathen's Penance, the Imposed Load, she's referencing the life and experience of a young 17th century Algonquin and Mohawk woman she's the first American Indian canonized as a saint. That actually happened fairly recently. And she took on extreme penance practices, which are represented by the snow, and there's sort of cross-hatched walkway here. And then the columns on the left and right you see here, they are painted to resemble the quill work for which she was known. Quill work being an art form that is made from these softened porcupine quills. And Catholics, they praised her industriousness in producing this sort of quill work. They deemed it a Christian trait. But industriousness is also a native value and one she would have learned in her own tribal communities. And so just as Indigenous cultures, have long practiced these ideals that are then mirrored in mainstream feminism, I think you have this celebrated characteristic of this young and eventually sainted Native woman. The they preceded her introduction to Catholicism. And this intersection of worldviews, it's really further underscored. I'll talk about one more thing here, further underscored by there's the 4 directions Lakota symbol at the top of the work. And then notice how it becomes a Christian cross if the line below it is then conceptually and visually connected with it. And then nearby, next door, we have White Hawks Takes Care of Them. It's a series of 4 very large prints. And from left to right, I'll get it here. From left to right, the subtitles in English, and there are also Lakota subtitles, but in English they are Protect, Lead, Nurture, and Create. And the title and the subtitles, they really emphasize the role of women as respected cultural and community caretakers, as leaders, as mothers, as artists, celebrating women's respected positions in the community, in both domestic as well as political sort of responsibilities, is really key to Native feminisms. And the prints, they feature these abstracted but still recognizable plain style women's dentalium dresses. There are varying styles here, and the artist has actually talked about these in generational terms. So the really deep blue dress of Protect suggests so sort of more minimal style, and it suggests an older grandmother figure. And then on the other hand, we have the yellow, this bright yellow, yes, dress here. It's as White Hawk talks about, it's the most sort of blinged out dress, as she says, and it connotes a relative, a younger woman. And then a few steps over, we see the work of Wasauksing First Nation artist Maria Hupfield, Double Punch. This is a pair of striking gloves with these hand-sewn gold bells. And it's another piece that really emphasizes women's roles as leaders, as protectors, as athletes, as warriors, sort of femme warriors, giving it incredible resonance, I think, with White Hawks Takes Care of Them and Yazi's Sisters of War, and highlighting these respected decolonized roles is it's a crucial component of Native feminisms. And note, I don't know if you can see it here, but within the plexiglass, there are actually air holes in the plexiglass cover. These are living, breathing, jingling entities inside that they are meant to be worn. They're meant to be activated. They're meant to be used for the sort of community building. And I think the gloves also indicate that they're going to strike down colonizing narratives of heteronormativity, of victimization, of infantilization, and strike out, if you will, at those who might wish to harm vulnerable community members. And those community members, the vulnerable, are on display in this low plinth that we see in the center of the room. We're going to turn around to look at them. These are 3 of Dene Lakota Cherokee artist Natani Nota's soft sculptures, Dignity, Addiction, and Uncontrollable. And among other references, these pieces address the plight of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirits. These are groups who have experienced staggering rates of violence. And the androgynous, sort of abject forms of the sculptures draw connections between this continuing violence and continuing colonization. But the sort of brokenness of the pieces, they disconcertingly almost suggest contorted limbs, but that brokenness is really offset by the beadwork. And I don't know if we can zoom in far enough, but there is this meticulous beadwork. Nota uses a traditional form of women's aesthetic work as a form of caretaking, drawing on the healing potential this practice. And within the exhibition space, the sculptures, they're surrounded, they're protected, they're surrounded by Hupfield's striking gloves, White Hawk's caretakers, and then Yazi's warriors. So you get this sense of Native women protecting those susceptible to violence, and acknowledging this violence against Indigenous women and Two-Spirits, as well as the caretaking, protective role of women. Again, really important parts of Native feminisms. And then turning to the back corner, another of Nota's works, Don't Bump Her. Here we see she draws connections between violence against women and harms done to the earth. There's an eco-critical component here. In many Indigenous worldviews, the earth is not only sacred and central, it is also a feminine force. The earth mother, although specific terms vary, and bodies of women and bodies of land are deeply connected. And it's this link that is really underscored in Native feminisms, most concepts of it. And we see here, this is a found car bumper, and it does provoke associations with the oil industry, and by extension, extraction and production practices that have really wreaked havoc on Native lands. And this sort of specter of violence that I think is evoked by the title, Don't Bump Her, it might refer to harm done to the earth herself, sort of command that it stop, don't bump her. It also might refer to violence against women. One might envision a car hitting a woman, but it actually doesn't have to be that literal. I think it's notable that extraction sites and pipeline constructions that are on or near Native land, as they often are, they're accompanied by so-called man camps that they're built to temporarily house the primarily non-Native men working on the projects. And rates of sexual assault and violence against Indigenous women steeply increase because of these camps. And the perpetrators know that local law enforcement, they're stretched beyond capacity, and that at least in the US, tribal officers do not have the power to punish non-Native offenders. And so some studies have actually suggested that perpetrators, they target Indigenous women specifically because they know they can get away with it, that there is unlikely to be repercussions. The eco-critical cadence of Nota's feminism continues in this small work, No Lakes, here, which includes, these are two novelty mugs. I think you can see they feature the Land O'Lakes logo, the Indian maiden, Mia. She's kneeling before this unspoiled landscape. She's offering up a package of butter. This may be familiar to many of you. And Nota fills these mugs with black water, which, along with the title, No Lake, sort of twisting the company name, it indicates that these pristine land and lakes that are ostensibly celebrated in this logo perhaps are no more, thanks to extraction practices. And the work also foregrounds with Mia the stereotypic and often sexualized ways that Indigenous womanhood is represented in mainstream American culture. And this work, it has actually taken on a new meaning recently. Mia was quietly removed from Land O'Lakes packaging just last year. She disappeared. And while the removal of stereotypic imagery from product design is on the whole a positive step, Nota is now thinking through how this piece connects to the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. There's this new sort of layer to the work. And then the piece right next door in the center of the wall, Heavy Heels, this also addresses cultural stereotypes. It features a rolling pin weighing down a pair of moccasins, indicating the oppressive weight of Euro-American cultural biases, expectations placed on Native women. And then we return to a kind of eco-criticism and caretaking in Nota's Making the Disposable Sacred. It features dust masks that have been beaded. She saw media images of protectors at Standing Rock fighting against the pipeline being built, wearing masks to shield themselves against police wielding pepper spray. And she took these dust masks from her studio and beaded them. And this is a piece that really speaks to Nota's solidarity with people on the front lines fighting to protect sacred land. The cathartic healing power of the beading process, traditionally held to be women's work, and the artist's feelings of helplessness at being unable to join the fight in person at that time. And this is another work, of course, that has accrued a sort of additional meaning in the time of COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic, Indigenous communities have been among the worst hit populations. And so again, I think there's a new layer to this piece. I'll make a quick events plug here as well. Nota is going to be hosting a Native Feminisms reading group on February 6th, and you can RSVP to that on the website. And the final artist featured is Elizabeth Leponce, who is Anishinaabe and Métis, and also turns to eco-critical concerns in her work. With songs to pull oil from water on the left here, it shows three androgynous figures. They're staring out over what looks to be a kind of oil slick glinting on the water. Anishinaabe have, again, a sort of inherent connection to the land, Mother Earth, Aki, in their language, and damage to the environment is damage to her. So in the print, these figures are singing restorative songs to counteract the harm that we might imagine is from an oil spill here. And Leponce's practice is also very much circumscribed by Indigenous futurisms. This is a set of concepts that connect Native ways of knowing with contemporary science fiction, particularly space-time travel and post-apocalyptic narratives. And in Our Grandmothers Carry Water from the Other World, which we see here, we see the spiritual ancestors, the grandmothers, bringing water back to the earth to ensure her healing and survival. And Indigenous notions of past and present and future, they cannot be mapped along this linear timeline. Indigenous futures are inextricably linked with past and present, and this futurity is based on cyclical time. So you note the circle here, and this is certainly folded into conceptions of Indigenous feminisms. And Leponce explores these issues further in two animations that are on view in the gallery, and you can also access them on the website, Returning and Hands to Sky. And here, let me also say, the last thing I'll say is that the virtual show will feature short videos of the artists speaking about their practices, the works in the show, talking about what Native feminism means to them. And some of these videos I think are already up. There are definitely more that are forthcoming. I think a really important aspect of decolonizing exhibitions like this is ensuring that Native artists, who are a group that for too long they've been spoken for, they've been spoken about. We need to ensure that they have a platform to speak for themselves, and that their voices are heard. So you've heard my curatorial statement here tonight, my thoughts on the show and how it developed and came together, but this is really only a fragment of the project, and I encourage you to watch those videos. And I hope that this talk has given you a sense of the incredible variety and richness of the works that are being produced by artists whose practices are at this intersection of feminisms and indigeneity. And thank you all for tuning in, and I'm going to turn it back to Abby for our Q&A.
Hey, thank you, Betsy. That was wonderful. We have a comment, and then we also have a question, but I will start with a question about Sheldon's work, the Two Spirits TP. Can you speak about the Red Hand And this question is from Steph.
Yes, there are so many layers to pull out here, and Sheldon is going to talk about all of this more. Sheldon Raymore will talk about all of this more. But yes, you see the red hand here. This is a symbol that is used by to represent missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits. It has become the symbol for Indigenous people and their allies who are fighting against this epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits. So it's a very potent and powerful symbol here that he has included, overlaid or included in the visage of Prepohantis, who is Sheldon's two-spirit alter ego.
Great, thank you. Other than that, we have a comment from Brittany. Brittany, do you want me to read it out loud, or I'll give you a moment you can unmute yourself if you'd like to add in.
Oh no, go ahead.
Oh, great. Just a comment that Mia was drawn by an Ojibwe artist.
Yes, yes. Thank you for bringing that up. That it is a long history that I think is so fascinating. The Land O'Lakes company, I think they held a sort of competition, and in 1928 or 1929 they adopted the original, what we see in these novelty mugs. I believe this is the original, and it has changed a couple of times. I think at one point, an artist, a woman whose name I forget, she sort of streamlined it. She made it a little more modern. And then, yes, an Ojibwe artist is the third artist who revised this image and did so in a way that, and I don't think we're seeing his version here, but it was the version most recently seen on Land O'Lakes packaging. And he was an Ojibwe artist, and he, in many ways, made this image more culturally appropriate, as I understand it. That he ensured that her clothing and some of the symbols on her clothing were actual sort of symbols that made sense for Ojibwe culture. And that is the woman who was on the most recent packaging, again, who was removed. And so there is, I think there is a certain ambivalence. Some people feel kind of ambivalent about her removal, because at this point it's the removal of an Indigenous artist's work that had been widely seen by so many people. So I guess the bottom line is it's complicated, and you're right. You're so right to point to that. And for those of you that are interested in this artist, and I am embarrassed to admit I'm forgetting his name, but I know that his work is addressed in Bill Anthony's book on Native moderns. So if those of you who are interested in this artist, he's addressed there.
Great, thank you. And I think we have one more question, and this is from Caroline Gillespie. A big thanks to you and a congratulations to your show. She said she also wants to ask about decolonization that has become more prominent in recent discussions of how we teach, write, curate, etc. Could you speak a bit more about your approach, the process, or strategies while organizing this exhibition that help to challenge colonial narratives?
Great, thank you. Yes, I think decolonization and the sort of, decolonize this place, I think the word decolonize is thrown around a lot today. It has become a little bit of a buzzword in the arts, and sometimes, and I think it means different things to different people. Decolonizing, I think at its root is the undoing of colonization. And I think that comes out in many different ways. You can think of this politically, and you can think of this as a more sort of theoretically or epistemologically. Not that you can ever sort of totally separate the two, but an example of a politically decolonized place would be, I think of India becoming an independent, independent from England after World War II. The English got out, it has been decolonized. In that way, again, it's all remains tricky, and there's still a complicated web. With indigenous cultures in Native North America, it is a continuing state of colonization. And I think it's actually one of the reasons that some people would argue that post-colonialism is not the right way to think through these issues. And we've turned to decolonization. And there is a way of thinking through this theoretically. And I think for a show like this, it's about decolonizing feminism. It's about removing a kind of bias that that there is any one universal feminism, and particularly one that is whitewashed, that is based on the experience of Euro-American women. I think a lot of work has been done in this realm, but I think that we're still suffering from sort of echoes of that whitewashed feminism. And my strategy here, let me turn to your question here, practical question. My strategy for decolonizing this exhibition was seeking the input of the artists and making sure that I was not misrepresenting them, misrepresenting their work, speaking about their work in a way or writing about it that was inappropriate. And so in my correspondence with the artists, for some of them, I had works in mind, and I said, I'm thinking about this work. Do you think it's appropriate for this show? Do you have other works that you might want to show? So I gave them the opportunity to talk about other works they might have. And I would like to point again to the artist videos, because I think they're a really important part of this exhibition that allow for the voices of the artists to come through. And I'm so grateful for the virtual version of this show, because it does provide that platform. I think it's so important to hear these artists speaking about their works in their own words. And I will also say that the essay that I wrote for this exhibition, and that is posted on the website, is an essay that I sent that essay out to all of the artists and asked for their approval and suggested revisions. And we did with each of the artists. I went through a back and forth where they pointed out areas where they thought I had used the wrong word, or no, not quite, that's not quite what this is going for. And ensure, they all had final say, they all had final approval on that essay that talks about their works. And that was an important part of my editorial process for the essay here. And even tonight, I spoke about a lot of the ideas that I also bring up in the essay. So the artists informed my talk here tonight as well.
Great, thank you. There's a few comments and such in the chat, which I think there's one about the positioning of the broken soft sculptures and how thoughtfully they're placed and protected by the women and the women's dresses on both sides. A comment on how powerful it is. And there's a few more, but I think, let me see, one just came in. Are there artists from Alice? Thank you for sending this one in. Are there other artists or approaches to aspects of Native feminisms that you were unable to include in the exhibition that you would like to highlight? And this will kind of be our last question, because I know we're up on our 6:45 time.
Sure, that's a great question to end on. And I could talk about this for another hour. There are, if I had the space and the budget and the scheduling had worked out, there are so many other artists that I would have loved to include. Just looking at the show here and thinking about this show, I would have loved to include some artists in particular who work more in the realm of photography. I'm thinking of the work of people like Cara Romero and Matika Wilbur, Wendy Red Star. There are some really fantastic artists who are photographers or sort of multidisciplinary artists who include photography in their work. It would have also been nice, I think. I don't even know how to go through this. Let me highlight, actually, as I'm speaking about this, the work of Emma Robbins. I would have loved to include her. She's a Dene artist based out of LA, Dene Navajo artist. Would have loved to include her work, but silver lining is that she will be giving an artist talk on her art practice and her activism, particularly in bringing running water to households on the Navajo Nation. She will be giving that talk. I forget the exact, on a Saturday in February. It's on the website. And I really encourage you to see that talk. I think it'll be fantastic. There are some painters I would have loved to include as well. Jody Herrera's paintings would have been fantastic. Marla Allison's paintings would have been really great. And I guess I'll end this by saying that I think of this show, it's the tip of the iceberg, right? That the artists I have are fantastic. They have been wonderful to work with, and I'm very happy with the way this show has come to fruition. But if I had, 10 more Apex Art Gallery spaces, I would be able to fill them with fantastic art, because there is a huge number of artists producing incredible works that need to be shown. Yeah, and I'll end it there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Betsy, and thank you for everyone who has joined us tonight. The recording of this tour will be up online, but then of course we invite you to explore it yourself. Kind of click around on the online exhibition. There's tons of links and content as Betsy mentioned, artist interviews and a couple of the artist videos. And then we have several events to join again, and a couple of events that really you'll get to add your voice in a little bit more in discussions, such as our reading group. But all those links and RSVPs are on our website. So thank you so much and have a good night.